Hi everyone, welcome back to my Pasigodesign watercolor channel. If you haven't checked out my previous one, it had to do with watercolor washes. But today, another technique, we'll be talking about the wet on wet. And what in the world is that all about? If you're brand new to watercolor, it gets confusing. So just a video to explain a few concepts, and we'll do some little pictures and do some painting. All right, so what I have here, my tools are my brushes. I have a calligraphy brush, actually two calligraphy brushes. This one's very fine, more like a liner, and a little square brush. I may not even use everything. We'll see. They're there for me to pick them if I need them. The colors that I have are Quin Rose from Daniel Smith. I put a little dab of color on one of these little wells. I won't need a lot of color here. It's just going to be little samples that I'm going to be doing here with you. I'm not making a painting. We're experimenting. Hansa Yellow Medium and by Daniel Smith, and an Impression by M. Graham. So the paper that I've used is a Fabriano, 140 pounds. For me, it's a trial paper for experimentation, and so I often use this before I start a painting, maybe another painting of the same subject that I practiced first. But basically, it just practicing a little bit beforehand allows you to take the fear out of what it is that you plan to do, because if you don't really know what you're going to be doing on your painting, then when you start with something in your mind that says, well, I have to make a beautiful painting, but I don't know how I'm going to execute it, that's scary. It would scare me too. So that's why I like to just prepare. All right, so here's the preparation. We're going to look at colors and brushes, paper, and design. So let's just start with, it could be anything for this practice. It could be a design of any shape that you like to paint. So for me right now, I'm thinking there's a lot of leafy shapes out there right now outside. And so I'm just going to, I don't really know exactly what they're looking like right now, but here's like maybe some crazy shape here that doesn't even resemble a real tree leaf, like maple tree leaf. It doesn't matter. It's just to give you something to put color on. Next, I'm going to mix my paints. Actually, I'm going to use a different brush for doing that, because maybe just a little brush like this to get some pigment, some nice wet pigment in another well here. What I like to do sometimes to get started is I will use one of these little squeezy things and put some water in here, and I'll mix some paints in here of different consistencies. So here we go. We'll take some of this pink, which is the Quin Rose. It's a little pinkish. Now that may not make a very nice leaf paint, but that's okay. Well, we're going to experiment, right? It's all about trial and error. Now this one is the Hansa Yellow Medium, so it's already a little bit redder, or yeah, it has a little bit more orangey, I should say, a little orangier than for example, a Hansa Yellow Light or a Nazo or something that's closer to the greens. And this is my blue, my Pression, which is very deep, very dark. Gives us a nice range of browns and deep oranges, a lot of beautiful colors. All right, so now I have these little mixes. I still need my little mixes, because even though I'm going to do wet on wet now, what I've just done here, if I feel like I saturated the color and I mixed another color with it, you can make as many of these as you want and pick from whichever well that you want. And these little palettes are really handy for that. It allows you to do different things. So let's start wet on wet. Wet brush on wet paper. So it means that I'll have to wet a part of this leaf shape. And what I'm doing right now is wetting it, putting enough water on here so that I can see it shining on the paper, putting enough water to see the shine and also to see where I might have missed an area. So because I have a choice right now, what I can do is leave some little gaps. That's okay. It's a leaf shape. It doesn't matter. It could have holes. So don't be afraid to leave little gaps for now. Or if you want to cover the whole shape, that's good too. The next step is what the wet-on-wet technique looks like. Is now we're going to take some of the paints that we have here and we will apply the color into the wetness of the shape. So I have some reds that I can use, pinky reds, but you'll see what happens once they start to mix. Taking some of my yellows, what happens to my reds is they start to turn orange, right? And continuing on, I can see that it's still wet everywhere. That's good. Now what's happening is the colors are moving, they're merging. I'm taking color from two different troughs here, little troughs, but they're not even looking like what's in here. They're looking like what the blend of my color is. Now I've got a lot of water on here. The reason why I have a lot of water and it's very shiny right now is because I already had water in my brush. So it added an extra amount of water as soon as I picked up paint from here and put it on here. Water here, wet on wet. Let's do another one. We're going to let this dry. Obviously now, right now, this is not a good time to go back into it to do anything. In fact, if there's anything you're going to do, it's going to be to pick up the little pools of color that form on the edges. And I like to use this coffee filter. It's perfect for stuff like this. But you don't have to do that. If you don't have any coffee filters, all you need is a paper towel, or take all the water out of your brush like this. I just take all the water out of my brush and I will pick up some of that color in here. So there's a couple of ways we can do that, just to get rid of all those areas of very watery, very loose watery color. There we go. The next thing I'm going to do, first of all, I wanted to show you, you can also tilt your board up a little bit. I like to use just a little block like this, and I just basically stick it underneath my board, and then it allows the colors to move freely from top to bottom. So give that a try if you find you've got a lot of water on your paper that's pooling. That's very helpful. I'm going to move these out of the way, and I'm going to make another leaf shape here. I don't really know what kind of a tree would make this kind of shape, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to do now is, while this dries, of course, I'm going to try different colors. So what if I did exactly what I did earlier? Now you can see that my paint is a little bit colored. It has a little bit of that redness in here from before, and that's okay. That's okay for now, because this is, again, first, it's an experiment, and second, you can add some color in your base. If that's that base coat of water, you can put a little tint to it. because we're going to go back into it anyways and put more color. Okay, and again, you see where I left a few white areas, and it's really just to give it a little bit of interest. So let's start with some of the yellows, and I'm going to again apply the yellows up here, maybe on the tips, and as I move down I will start putting in some blues. Now this blue and this yellow is not turning very green, is it? So what I might want to do here is add more yellow pigment to my watery mix. And add a little bit more water. Okay, let's just see what this yellow looks like. It's a little bit brighter, right? So you can see that depending on how much paint you have in your trough, you will get different effects on the paper. Let's do some more blues in here. And I'm just adding color to the areas of wetness. Now, notice now that this part was starting to dry. I spent too much time talking. And guess what? I don't have a wet-on-wet here anymore. And so this is what's going to happen, is you have a formation of a line, perfect line, going from top to bottom on this shape. That probably doesn't matter, especially for what we're doing right now. If it matters in something that you're doing, then you have to watch for that. You have to make sure that your paper continues to be wet while you start dropping colors into it, okay? So now I've just created another leaf shape with some colors. I've left little white areas, and that's up to you. We can still, you notice I'm going back in here and I'm still doing a little line here, and that's okay because it's still wet. Colors are moving. Where I don't want to do anything at all is ever go back to this shape right now and start throwing stuff on it, because it's starting to dry. It's at different levels of dryness, and it really needs to be finished drying before I do anything else. But this one is wet, and I can play with it if I want, okay? Just keep that in mind. All right, now let's do one last shape. This time, I'm going to make it maybe like a petal, and I'm going to do a little bit more to this shape. Maybe it's not a petal, maybe it's a leaf again. Big leaves. All right. And now I will take a little bit more blues. It's kind of running out of the blues here. I'm gonna go pretty dark. And we're going to see what happens. And if you want to try a square brush, that's always an option at this point. And this is a wash brush. Holds a lot of water. And I'm going to do it because I want to see if I can get a different effect. So here, okay. And I'm just going down the paper, playing with my colors. So this is a wet area. It's not pure water, but it's wet. Here there was pure water, and you see the colors are moving. If I take my blue now and I add it here, what will happen? This, right? It moves, and it's moving quite a bit because it's very wet. If I take my brush and I do it down here where I had not placed water before, there's a lot more control going on here. So why is that? It's just simply because the water here, there wasn't two layers of water, let's put it that way. Here I put water first, then wet pigment, and then blue. The wet pigment was yellow. Water, wet yellow, and then wet blue. Here I put no water, but wet yellow and blue. So the effects are different. They're a little bit different, and it's just the fact that this won't move as much as this because this has more water. Understanding these little concepts will really help you to determine what it is that you want to do once you have the paint in your brush, if what you're doing will result in what's in your head. So I really encourage you to experiment with this wet-on-wet technique because it is very beautiful. It's very beautiful because the water and the colors just flow really nicely together. And once it's dry, you can go back in here and start doing things. So the difference between a wet-on-wet and a wash that is on dry, it's basically the fact that we add water first. When we do a wash, let's take some of this red here. When we do a wash, we are trying to get a really nice blending of colors going down on your paper. And of course, for that to happen, we often want to lift our board a little bit so the water really, I'm going to move that so I can lift so that the water can come down. And we have that little bead here that we're carrying through, right? And I can go all the way down to the bottom of my paper with that bead. And we can blend some of that together over here. That's okay, because this is still wet. When we put a lot of water on our paper, it stays wet for a while. And again, this is experimental paper. If you're going to do this again, you may get different results based on the textures that you're using and based on the type, the brand of paper that you're using. There we go. So let's just stop here. And now I have a wash that was done on dry. And inside that wash on dry, I added some color to the edges a little bit. Picking up the color from the edge of the leaf shape. You can see now what's happening here is that these two colors are merging together. So wherever the colors, where they're wet, wherever they meet, they blend. Practice this. Practice these wet-on-wet areas. One last thing is if you put some very intense color in a wet area, let's pick this one right here. Might be just a little bit too wet. So we can pick it up with a paper towel, like I said, whatever you have at hand. And notice that if I put some color, dark color in here, it still moves in there and in a nice way, right? Here it's starting to dry, so it's like, I don't want to go there. Let's try it over here. These little edges are going to look nice because they're blending with the water that's already on there. But once it starts to dry, you just let it dry. And the only reason I went back to these is because I could still see the puddle of water that was there, like for example in this one. The reason why it's coming out so dark is because I picked a lot of intense paint, a lot of pigment, you see? This is what it looks like. That's the line I can make with that. And what is the line that I could make with my watery mix? I probably had less pigment than that when I did it. It would be lighter. Okay, so this one dark, this one light. And it depends on how much paint you have in there. So there we go. Give that a try. Try those little wash things. This is just the beginning of a painting, right? Because we're going to come back in here and we're going to do more stuff. So this would just be to practice applying the color on a wet base. All right, we'll see you next time.